The Marine wasn't even looking at her anymore. He'd stopped trying to respond about 3 insults ago, just standing there in Section 104 with his worn-out ACU jacket and that 1,000-yard stare that comes from seeing things most people only have nightmares about. But she wasn't done. Not even close. The woman had positioned herself 1 row down, turned around completely, addressing him like he was some kind of exhibit she needed to educate the crowd about. "Oh, so you're one of those hero types, huh?" Her voice cut through the pre-show buzz like a knife through silk, sharp and deliberate, and loud enough that 20 rows in every direction could hear every syllable. "Bet you feel real proud about whatever oil war they sent you to fight for corporate profits." The veteran said nothing. His jaw tightened. That was it. But she read his silence as an invitation to continue, to perform for the growing audience of concert-goers who were now watching this unfold instead of checking their phones or grabbing beers. "What's the matter? Can't defend yourself without a gun?" She let out a theatrical laugh, the kind designed to humiliate, to reduce. "I'm exercising my free speech here. You know, the thing you supposedly fought for, except you probably just followed orders like a good little soldier boy, never questioned what you were actually doing over there." Someone in the crowd mumbled for her to knock it off. She spun on them instantly. "What? You don't think we should be able to question our military? That's fascism. That's literally fascism." She turned back to the Marine, who still hadn't moved, hadn't responded, hadn't given her anything except his silence and his dignity. "Look at him. Can't even engage in a simple conversation about the consequences of American imperialism. This is exactly what's wrong with this whole military worship culture. We put these guys on pedestals, and they can't even articulate why they—" That's when the lights dropped. Not a technical glitch. Not the scheduled start of the show. The entire amphitheater went black in a way that felt intentional, almost surgical. 30,000 people went from watching a confrontation to sitting in complete darkness in less than a second. The woman's voice cut off mid-sentence, swallowed by the sudden void and the collective intake of breath from the crowd. For 5 long seconds, there was nothing. No music, no lights. Just the sound of 30,000 people wondering what the hell was happening. Then a single spotlight hit the stage. Not the full stage, just center, where Toby Keith stood with an acoustic guitar already strapped on, his silhouette cutting against the darkness like something out of a film about reckonings and moments that define people. He didn't say hello, didn't welcome anyone to anything. He just stood there, letting the silence build, letting every single person in that venue understand that something unscheduled was happening, something that mattered. "I heard that." His voice came through the PA system low and direct. No showmanship, no performance, just statement. Every word of it. "And I'm going to tell you something right now. We're not starting this show until we deal with what just happened." The crowd noise started to swell, but Toby raised one hand and it died instantly. That's the kind of authority you can't manufacture. That's earned through decades of connecting with people who trust you to be real with them. There's a lady in Section 104 who just spent the last 10 minutes using her freedom of speech to tear down a Marine veteran. And you know what? She's absolutely right about one thing. He paused, letting that land, letting the confusion ripple through 30,000 brains, simultaneously wondering where he was going with this. She does have that right. That Marine. He fought for her to have exactly that right. To stand in a public place and say whatever she wants about him, about the military, about this country. He put his life on the line for that right. The activist's voice cut through the darkness, emboldened. "Exactly. So maybe you should—" "I'm not finished." 3 words. That's all it took. The temperature in the venue dropped 20 degrees. See, here's what's fascinating about this moment. You used your freedom to humiliate someone, to mock someone, to reduce a human being who served this country to a punchline for your political performance. And that's your right. But let me tell you what that Marine could have done and didn't. Toby shifted his weight, the spotlight catching the expression on his face that was somehow both gentle and absolutely unyielding. He could have responded with the kind of language they taught him in boot camp. He could have reminded you that the First Amendment you're wielding like a weapon was written in blood by people like him. He could have made you look small in front of all these people. But you know what he did instead? 30,000 people leaned forward in the dark. He respected your right to speak, even when you were using it to disrespect everything he sacrificed for. Toby let that sit for a moment, Let it permeate through the crowd like smoke through air. Now, you've got a choice to make right now. You can keep doing what you're doing. I will not stop you. This is America. You can stand up right now and keep going. And I guarantee you that Marine still won't put his hands on you. He still won't shut you down, because that's not who he is. That's not what we do. But before you make that choice, I want you to ask yourself one question. He paused, and in that pause you could hear the shift happening, could feel the air itself changing texture. When's the last time you actually sacrificed something for the freedoms you're so eager to lecture people about? The silence was different now, heavier, charged with something that felt like collective realization. I'm going to be straight with you, ma'am. I don't know your story. Maybe you've got reasons for feeling how you feel. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you've been hurt by this country in ways that make you angry. If that's true, I'm genuinely sorry for that pain. His voice softened but didn't lose its edge. But that man you were mocking? He doesn't know your story either. And he still fought for you. He didn't ask what your politics were before he put on that uniform. He didn't check your social media to see if you'd support him before he deployed. He just went. And when he came back, if he was lucky enough to come back, he came back to a country where people like you can stand in a concert venue and call him a mindless pawn, and he can't do a damn thing about it except take it. Someone in the crowd shouted something supportive. Toby shook his head. No cheering. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about understanding something fundamental. He looked directly towards Section 104, though in the darkness and distance it was impossible to know if he could actually see the activist or the Marine. Freedom of speech means you get to say what you want. It doesn't mean freedom from consequences of being heard. It doesn't mean people have to respect what you say just because you have the right to say it. And it sure as hell doesn't mean you get to hide behind the very freedom someone else secured for you while you mock them for securing it. The activist's voice again, smaller now, defensive. I have a right to protest military. You absolutely do. Toby cut in, not aggressively, almost gently. And he has the right to sit there and take it with more grace than most people could manage. But here's what I'm asking you to consider. Is this what you wanted your protest to look like? Is this the impact you were going for? Because from where I'm standing, you didn't change any minds tonight. You didn't educate anyone. You didn't spark meaningful dialogue about foreign policy or military ethics. What you did was humiliate one man who can't fight back without proving your point for you. And you know what that makes you? The crowd was so silent, you could hear people breathing. It makes you someone who confused having rights with being right. He let that statement hang in the air like a verdict. Now here's what's going to happen. I'm going to play a song. It's called American Soldier. It's about the men and women who serve this country, who sacrifice things you and I can't even comprehend, who come home broken sometimes and have to rebuild themselves in a country that half the time doesn't even understand what they gave up. And while I play it, I want you to think about something. I want you to think about the difference between free speech and good speech, between having the right to say something and having something worth saying. He strummed the guitar once, the sound cutting through the darkness like a prayer. And ma'am, you don't have to listen. You can walk out right now. That's your right too. But if you actually stay and listen, maybe you'll understand why 30,000 people came here tonight and why they're about to stand up for that Marine you just tried to tear down. The first notes of American Soldier started to fill the amphitheater, soft and mournful and impossibly sincere. But Toby wasn't done talking. He played and spoke simultaneously, his voice weaving between the melody like a narrator in a film about reckoning and grace. You see, what people don't understand about military service is that it's not about politics. It's not about red or blue, left or right. It's about the willingness to write a blank check to this country, payable up to and including your life. And that Marine you were mocking? He wrote that check. He signed his name on it. And when he came back, you cashed it by using your freedom to humiliate him. Lights started to come up slowly across the venue, revealing faces. Some crying, some angry, some just processing what they were witnessing in real time. And in Section 104, the activist was still standing, but something in her posture had changed. She wasn't performing anymore. She was listening, actually listening. This isn't about making you feel bad, Toby continued, his fingers moving across the guitar strings with the kind of muscle memory that comes from thousands of performances. This is about making you feel something real. Because you know what the hardest part about coming home from war is? It's not the physical wounds. It's not even the nightmares. It's the realization that the country you fought for has the freedom to not care that you fought for it. That's the real sacrifice. Knowing that your service gives other people the luxury of never having to think about service at all. The song built, and as it did, something remarkable started happening. People around the Marine in Section 104 started standing, not in protest, not in confrontation, just standing, creating a wall of silent solidarity around this man who'd taken abuse with dignity. The activist saw it happening, saw herself becoming surrounded not by hostility, but by something far more powerful, by witness, by people who'd seen what she'd done and chosen a different response than the one she'd offered. Toby's voice cracked slightly on the chorus, the emotion breaking through his control in a way that felt earned, not performed. That man you mocked tonight, he's not your enemy. He's not your target. He's someone's son, someone's father maybe, someone's brother. Someone who saw things in whatever desert or jungle they sent him to that you couldn't handle for 5 minutes. And he came back here and chose to live with those memories so you could have the freedom to tell him his memories don't matter. The breaking point came not with anger, but with clarity. Toby stopped playing, just stopped, mid-song, letting the last chord ring out into silence. Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to change your politics. I'm not asking you to support the military or war or anything else. I'm asking you to recognize the humanity in someone before you use your ideology as a weapon against them. Because once you start seeing people as symbols instead of people, you've already lost whatever moral high ground you think you're standing on. He waited. The entire amphitheater waited. And in that waiting, something shifted. The activist sat down, slowly. Not in defeat, but in something that looked like the beginning of recognition. The Marine, for his part, hadn't moved, hadn't gloated, hadn't even looked at her. He just sat there, still dignified, still silent, still carrying whatever weight he'd brought to this concert in the first place. Here's what I want to leave you with, Toby said, his voice quiet now, intimate, like he was talking to one person instead of 30,000. Freedom isn't free. I know that's a cliché. I know it's on bumper stickers and t-shirts and sounds like something your drunk uncle says at Thanksgiving. But it's true in a way that's easy to forget when you've never had to pay the price for it. That Marine paid a price, and his payment bought your right to mock him. But it also bought you the chance to be better than that, to use your freedom for something more than tearing down someone who can't defend themselves without looking like the villain in your story. The aftermath of that night rippled out in ways nobody could have predicted. The activist, her name was Jennifer Corrigan, a graduate student in political science at Berkeley, didn't leave the concert. She stayed through the entire show, and according to multiple witnesses, she cried through most of it. Not performative crying, not the kind designed to reclaim victimhood or redirect sympathy, just crying, processing something she hadn't expected to confront that night. 3 days later, she published an essay in the campus newspaper. Not an apology exactly. She was too intellectually honest for that kind of simplification, but a reflection on the difference between political conviction and personal cruelty, on the realization that she'd become so focused on systemic critique that she'd forgotten how to see individuals. The essay went viral in certain circles, spawned debates in classrooms across the country about activism, about speech, about the line between righteous anger and personal vindictiveness. The Marine, a 34-year-old named Marcus Williams, who'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan and come back with a Purple Heart and PTSD he was still learning to manage, gave one interview to a veterans podcast 6 months later. He talked about that night with a kind of gentle wisdom that suggested he'd done more processing of Toby's words than anyone realized. I didn't need defending, he said. I'm used to it. People say stuff. It's whatever. But what Toby did wasn't about defending me. It was about teaching everyone in that place, including her, that you can stand up for principles without tearing people down. That you can believe in something without making enemies out of everyone who disagrees with you. Toby himself rarely talked about that night directly. When pressed in interviews, he'd just shrug and say something about how music venues were supposed to be places where people came together, not apart. But those who knew him well understood that night was a crystallization of everything he'd been trying to say through his music for decades. That patriotism wasn't about blind flag waving or uncritical support for every military action. It was about recognizing the cost of freedom and honoring the people who paid it, even when, especially when, you disagreed with the wars they were sent to fight. The video of that moment, captured on dozens of phones from different angles, became one of those internet artifacts that resurfaces every few years when the country has debates about free speech, about military service, about the difference between rights and responsibilities. And every time it resurfaces, the comment section fills up with the same divide. Some people see Toby as having shut down legitimate protest. Others see him as having delivered a masterclass in how to defend someone without attacking their critic. But almost everyone agrees on one thing. Those 30,000 people witnessed something that transcended typical political theater. They saw a moment where someone with a platform chose to use it not to inflame, but to illuminate. Not to win, but to teach. The Marine and the activist never spoke directly, as far as anyone knows. But according to some reports, Jennifer Corrigan spent the next year volunteering with a veterans advocacy group focused on mental health services. She never abandoned her anti-war politics. She still believed military intervention did more harm than good, but she learned to separate systems from the people caught in them, learned to critique policy without dehumanizing those who executed it. And Marcus Williams? He kept going to concerts, kept wearing his ACU jacket, kept carrying whatever weight he carried from those 2 tours in Afghanistan. But he also started speaking at high schools about his experiences, about PTSD, about the reality of military service beyond the heroic narratives or the critical deconstructions, about being human in a world that wanted to make him either a hero or a villain when he was just a guy trying to figure out how to live with what he'd seen. That's the thing about that night that most people miss when they watch the clip or read about it later. It wasn't about winning. It wasn't about one side defeating another. It was about Toby Keith using his platform, his moment, his control of that space to remind 30,000 people that before politics, before ideology, before debates about foreign policy or military ethics or anything else, there are just humans. Trying to make sense of this impossible country we all share. Trying to navigate freedoms that are precious and complicated and require more from us than just exercising them loudly. The lesson wasn't about respecting the military. It wasn't about silencing protest. It was about the hardest thing any of us have to learn, that being right about a principle doesn't give you the right to be cruel to a person. That freedom of speech includes the freedom to speak with cruelty, but also includes the responsibility to ask ourselves if cruelty is really the point. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when someone tears you down isn't to fight back, but to let someone else speak up for the dignity you refuse to surrender. Toby Keith understood all of that in a way that transcended politics. He understood that the Marine's silence was more powerful than any response could have been. He understood that the activist's anger came from a place that probably had its own logic and pain. And he understood that his job that night wasn't to referee a debate or declare a winner. It was to hold up a mirror to everyone in that amphitheater and ask them what kind of country they wanted to build with all this precious, painful freedom they'd inherited from people who fought for it without knowing who'd use it or how. That's why the story endures. Not because it was a political victory for one side, but because it was a human moment in an age increasingly starved for them. A moment where someone chose grace over gotcha, teaching over triumph, and reminded us all that the freedom to speak our minds is meaningless if we lose our souls in the speaking.